to Breaking the Grade.
Brian Zapf has always been good at math, and the strategic CFO has taken those number skills from his start at a community bank to investment banking to M&A advising, and he uses them today at his fractional CFO business. But it wasn't until an accounting course at the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University that Zapf fully grasped how financial statements for a business tell an important story that any business owner needs to know. By listening to our show today about this math man who has created over $1 billion in value for his 100 plus clients over his career, you'll learn about how Zapf went from an Econ Poli Sci major at the University of Michigan to work at a bakery to starting his current company, Flight Financial. How working for multiple companies across multiple industries has led Zapf to become a seasoned strategic accounting advisor to his clients, mainly in the education space. And what Zapf has learned from failing his first accounting class in college and, unfortunately, a failed partnership with his best buddies. So breakers, band together as we talk to a man who is right on the money with his knowledge and very caring personality. Brian Zapf joined the show, and my co-host John Gamba.
Hey, Brian. Welcome to Breaking the Grade.
Hey, thanks, John. Josh, great to be here.
Good. Glad to have you, man. I have to admit, although you and I have had some conversations, we've never met in person, but I feel like I know you like a brother because I read what you write and I can feel your energy. You're a good guy. So really happy to have you on the show.
I appreciate that, Josh.
Yeah. The thing is, if you were from my family, it would be odd because none of us are math people. But you clearly are a math person. So let's kind of start there. Talk to us about, your love of numbers and how math has always come easy for you.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in the Midwest, born and raised in Dayton, Ohio. And from a pretty early age, I was always good with numbers, liked doing math problems. I was always doing extra homework and trying to get ahead in math classes, got straight A's in school, was an honor student, and, kind of knew that I wanted to do something that involved numbers, but I also knew that I couldn't just be alone doing numbers in a room, right? Like I wanted to know kind of the story behind different numbers, wanted to be involved with people. But other than that, I had way too many interests in high school heading into college, and did my undergrad at University of Michigan, and it's a huge school, right? It had like 40,000 students on campus when I was there in the early 2000s. And, I didn't go into it with kind of a clear plan of, okay, this is what I'm going to study and this is the job that I'm going to get. And, I kind of lost my way. I still had numbers and did pretty well in classes involving numbers, but I wasn't going to networking events and I wasn't doing what you needed to do at that point in time to get, a job in a competitive field. So when I got out of school, I had no prospects lined up. I had to move back in with my parents, which, you can imagine how humiliating that is to a kid at that point in his life. And, I applied to a bunch of different jobs and actually got a job working in a bakery. That was my first job out of college. And, I'm there one evening kind of putting loaves of bread back on the shelf. And this elderly gentleman comes up next to me and he's just kind of behind the line. I'd never seen him before, didn't know who he was. He's kind of looking around and we just start talking. And it turns out that he's one of the founder's sons or maybe the founder of the bakery. I can't remember, but it was a family-owned bakery, Dorothy Lane Market. If you ask anybody in Dayton, Ohio, they probably know what bakery it is. But anyway, we start talking and he's like, so let me get this straight. You went to one of the top universities in the country and now you're working here in my bakery, putting loaves of bread back on the shelf. He's like, what's the plan here? And I told him, I really don't know. I'm just working in here until inspiration strikes or I figure something out or, my parents kick me out of the house. And he's like, well, you'll figure it out. Inspiration always strikes, and you just got to find that thing that sparks you, and you'll know it when you see it. And I was there at that bakery for maybe a couple months after that, and I managed to land a job at a local family-owned community bank. It was actually owned by a friend from high school who I'd run cross country with. And I got a job there, working as a bank teller. I was making maybe $10 an hour. And, I thought it was great at the time. I had to dress up and go in, got to interact with, the customers that would come in through the door. And it was very kind of the old school, Main Street, small town banking model, right? You come in, kind of chit chat with the customers, advise them where you can. And I realized from that, I love financial advisory, but I want to do something on a bigger scale. I really want to work with companies and with founders. And so I realized to do that, I needed to go back to school and get my MBA. And we had a family friend at that time who he was doing, venture capital investments in kind of the healthy living space. And I asked him, what should I do if I want to work with companies and businesses? What's the best way to get like a broad business education? And he told me, investment banking, that's really where it's at. So I went into, the Kelley School of Business. They had an investment banking focused track. They had a great reputation for finance and accounting, and just the people there, a lot of really kind of kind, very generous, kind of salt of the earth, hardworking people.
Right.
So I went there, timing being what it was, I went into school there right as the Great Recession was hitting. And it's like, oh, crap, did I pick the wrong time to do this? They were sending offers to the prior year's class, and people just, getting a job on Wall Street did not seem like it was in the cards. So I had to do some creative networking and manage through an alumni connection. I did find a job in an investment bank. It was a very small, they call them boutique investment banks. It was out in Massachusetts. And it was actually in this antique colonial barn from like the 16 or 1700s. And the guy had repurposed it into office space, which it was cool looking, right? Very kind of idyllic, a lot of cow pastures around. But man, it was freezing in the middle of those Massachusetts winters. It was
No way.
Pretty drafty in the barn.
I can't imagine that. Well, before we move on here, so John, comment on the journey here, and you work with a lot of students who are in college or are getting their masters in different schools at Penn. So talk about that journey that everybody has to take, and probably that aha moment where you might be working at a supermarket or a gas station or somewhere you probably won't be for long, and somebody comes up and says, "What are you doing here?"
I so relate to Brian's story. First of all, how does a guy who has 100 clients that have gone on to earn valuations in excess of billions of dollars fail accounting? But before you answer, I want to say that it reminded me of a story when I got to Penn. I graduated from Penn and I found myself in Econ 101 my freshman year. And I took my first midterm and I got an 8. Yes, an 8 out of 100 on my midterm, which put me in a tough position. I was like, I'm going to fail. I'm going to flunk Econ 101. So I took the final and I got 100. And and that translated into a D-. And I was like, yes, I got a D. So I'm right there with you on your whole journey. Tell us about that. Did I hear that right in your bio? You failed accounting.
I did. And I was embarrassed for the longest time to post that story, but it is part of the journey. So, I was a Poli Sci Econ undergraduate major, but I'd heard a lot from my friends who were at Michigan's, Ross School of Business. Oh, you got to take accounting. It's the language of business. So I'm like, all right, why not? I've got room in my schedule for an elective. I'll sign up and we'll see what that's all about. And I got in there and it was just, I don't know, it was like drinking from a fire hose. I was not prepared for the onslaught of new knowledge. I didn't really, I had a pretty bad case of senioritis at that point. So for an elective, I'm like, all right, I'm probably not going to try to work too hard at this right now. And I definitely didn't give it kind of what it needed. And at the same time, I would say the instructor, he was a good instructor. He'd gotten great reviews from other students, but his style didn't really match the way that I needed to learn.
Yeah.
So, I take full responsibility, right? It was my effort. but at the same time, maybe it would have been easier if I'd had a different teacher.
Yeah.
And I got a D in the class, and yeah, scared the crap out of me, being a 20-something kid who'd gotten all A's up to that point.
I can relate. And back to Josh's point, the journey, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and we talk a lot about, we're big Simon Sinek, trust your why. And what is your why? I had a similar, I graduated from Penn, and I was kind of on a pre-law track, and I joined the public defender's office in Washington, D.C., and I was doing investigations of, felony crimes. And one day I kind of woke up, I was like, I don't know if this is really for me. It's probably that bakery moment that you had. I pivoted, I really kind of had that come to Jesus moment where I really thought about what I wanted to do. I went into business, and kind of the rest is history. So I really respect and can relate to your journey. When I'm working with entrepreneurs, a lot of young entrepreneurs and even student entrepreneurs, we get into that. What is your why? What is your passion? What are you trying to do in your life? Where can you leverage your skills, your talents? And we develop that. But sometimes it's just requires experience and going through different experiences before you kind of wake up and discover what you really want to do.
And I think that's really true, right? Like, you don't know what you don't know. And you can only learn so much, but it's really not until you get out in the world and start taking action and having experiences that path kind of reveals itself to you.
Yeah, and I have a lot of young entrepreneurs, especially social entrepreneurs. Mr. Gambo, give me some advice. And one of the advice as I give is, be interested, not interesting. Ask a lot of questions. When you see an industry, you see an entrepreneur, you see an advisor or a mentor, ask them about their journey. What lessons did they learn? Can they offer any advice as you're coming up as an entrepreneur? So, probing and inquiry and questioning is really important, instead of being so rigid and having such tunnel vision at an early age. You probably relate to that as well.
I completely agree with that. It's like what Dale Carnegie says, right? Like, people want you to take an interest in them. And if you do that, it really opens a lot of doors for you.
For sure.
I'd say too, right? Like, just in the light of COVID-19 and everything, life is what happens when you're busy making your plans. You can't see the path ahead of you, but if you're flexible and you're willing to reach out to people, good things will happen.
I think this gets us to, I'm going to fast forward here a little bit, kind of gets us to starting flight financial, taking flight with your own business. Talk to us kind of real briefly about why you decided to start the business. And then we're going to get into some real hands-on questions for you about what entrepreneurs should be doing in their own, accounting practices. But first, why'd you start the business?
Sure. And like you touched on in the intro, I worked with a lot of different types of companies and different sizes, worked with Fortune 50 companies with billions of dollars of revenue, and then small startups with maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue. And I kind of realized that a lot of the services that I was providing at these kind of larger white glove firms for some of these larger businesses, that smaller businesses, right? New founders who maybe don't have a lot of financial knowledge would benefit from some of these insights, but they need it done in such a way that's kind of tailored to them and kind of scoped to their size, and maybe a little bit more, budget friendly for them. So that was kind of the idea. I also, realized kind of after I was furloughed in the middle of COVID-19, after working 50 to 70-hour weeks for a large professional services firm, no job is really guaranteed except for the one that you create for yourself. So it was kind of, a two-way thing here, right? I wanted to help founders, use my financial knowledge for that. And I also wanted to take greater control of my own future.
Yeah, we say here at Penn GSC, never let a crisis go to waste, right? And when we thought about COVID-19 and the pandemic, the University of Pennsylvania and Graduate School of Education, in like 3 days, we went 100% online, and everybody kind of freaked out, and it was a crisis. But then we thought 2 billion learners worldwide were going to remote learning. what an opportunity, what an incredible opportunity to think about how we could transform education as we know it in hyper warp speed. And so, so many education entrepreneurs took that to heart. And what a surprise in 2021 and even into 2022, record investments in the ed tech and education space, complete transformations in digital learning, people getting smarter. A lot of challenges, a lot of things that have kind of gone awry, but it really has developed this new wave of transformative thinking in the glacial pace by which the education market tends to move. So I really relate to that story as well, Brian.
That's true. Record investments. Okay, so Brian, fantastic. We've got record investments and I'm running a business. I'm a founder and I've got a record investment. Why do I need a financial forecast if I've just got all this money? It's all good.
Yeah, and I'd say that mentality is pretty common to what I see with a lot of my founder clients, right? A lot of them are just, oh, maybe I need a bookkeeper, but why do I need to waste money on a forecast? And it's really that it's more about the thought process that you go through when you're creating a forecast, right? You've got to really understand and think through the drivers of your business, and you've got to apply that to the goals. If you want to be able to grow your business from 2 million in revenue to 5 million in revenue in a few years, what does that mean in terms of sales and marketing investment? What does that mean in terms of investment in, infrastructure? If you're hosting like an education software solution, do you need to build out the tech infrastructure for that? Do you need more development, more personnel? And it's really hard to think through a lot of that stuff or have to react to it in real time. So if you've got a forecast, it's almost like having a crystal ball into your potential financial future. You can model out different scenarios. If your revenues are going to double, what does that look like for the business? Or if we're heading into times of high inflation or, a potential recession and you lose, 10% of your sales or 20%, or your costs go up 50%, what does that look like? And what decisions do you need to make today to make sure that your business is prepared to not just weather the storm, but also to thrive?
Yeah. And I can speak to that a little bit, not necessarily the inflation part, but having run two businesses that when I started them were both 9-month businesses, tutoring and after school or after care enrichment. We had September through June, and then shit got pretty dry over the summer. Yeah. So, planning for that was always helpful. John, you were going to say something?
No, I was just going to say back to Brian's comment on founders and how founders think. I really related to those comments as well. When, at Penn's Graduate School of Education, I oversee our Milken business plan competition. And I often get asked the question, what really distinguishes a pitch and presentation? And I say, an investor will remember a lot of things, but they'll really remember your founding story and how you approached your financials. And it's not so important to have that hockey stick, but being able to substantiate your assumptions that and how those assumptions go into driving the competitive sustainable advantage for the business. If you can really articulate that in a clear and coherent way without using a lot of buzzwords, you're really going to capture the interest of investors. So it's your story, it's your why, but then it's getting into the discipline by which you're going to be able to manage the business. Those things come together, they synergize, and they become memorable. You agree with that, Brian?
Completely agree with that. And it's funny you use the term hockey stick, forecast there, because that's exactly what we talk about in investment banking, and these, especially if you're going after institutional capital, they see dozens and dozens of pitch decks every day, and they've all got similar hockey stick projections. So it really comes down to, what's the story here? Have you really thought through the assumptions? And then if your business is actually, generating kind of revenue and, costs and profits with that, how accurate are your forecasts? Like, do you have a good grip on kind of the pulse of your business? And does your forecast kind of reflect that?
Absolutely. One other thing, and Josh may be getting into this, in terms of your business and this idea of a fractional CFO, I get that question a lot, and I can kind of get a sense, Brian, for the kind of fractional CFO you are. There are transactional CFOs and there are strategic CFOs. I talk a lot about, HR directors. There's transactional HR benefits and making sure that you have payroll in line. And then there's strategic HR. The strategic CFO has a way of thinking through the strategy of the business more than just the accounting and financial components of it. Would you say that you're kind of balanced in being transactional and strategic, or do you go in one way or the other?
I would say, I started my career more on the strategic side. And then I realized, especially with companies with kind of 1 million to 10 million in sales, the financials were often a mess. And by the time you're ready to go to market to raise capital or to sell your business, it's almost too late. And there's a lot of catch-up work that has to happen to have, the financials in a way that investors or buyers need to see them. So I think it's kind of got to be two sides to it, right? You've got to have the strategic side and kind of know what you're looking to accomplish and how your numbers can help you get there. But then you really do need someone who can come in, clean up the books, and kind of get you on that steady financial operating cadence as well.
So I'm gonna ask you for some free advice here, not necessarily for me because I've been down this road and it was a tough one. But you talked about buyers and investors, and when that time comes, give us some real tangible help for the audience here of how founders should prepare their business for a buyer or an investor.
Sure. Yeah, and I'd say the big thing is making sure the financials are just buttoned up, right? Like you already kind of want to know that you can get your monthly bookkeeping done, ideally within 10 business days of the end of the month. You want to know you can close the books quickly because when you're going through a sale process, investors are going to want that financial data. You also, too, it helps if you've already got your story thought through, right? You've kind of, over like the past few years, what your numbers have done and what's caused them, to perform the way they have. And you've also got a story lined up for how that translates into the future growth opportunity. Because that's really what a buyer or an investor, that's what they're going to pay you for, is the future opportunity for, what can they make in terms of cash flow from your business. So in terms of what that, translates to into specifics, ideally you want to have monthly financials for the last 2 to 3 years for your business. And you want to be able to pull it out on a more granular level, right? They're going to want to see it by kind of customers to see if there's any customer concentration. They're going to want to be able to look at it by kind of your top suppliers as well, just to see maybe there's potential areas where they could save costs going forward. So those are the kind of things that they're going to look for.
Let's talk about what makes for a really great CEO and CFO relationship or partnership. One of the things that I like to share is transparency. You're going to have bad quarters. You're going to have bad months. You're going to miss projections. It's important to communicate that with your board and your investors in a clear and transparent way. Tell us a little bit about how you coach and how you work with your CEOs to kind of build a good partnership. What are some keys to success?
Sure. And it really is, like you said, it's got to be that partnership, and you want a CFO that's not just looking backwards, right? They're not just trying to dot the I's and cross the T's. They really need to be looking ahead proactively and thinking, okay, from a financial perspective, what's our cash flow looking like? If we want to, build out additional capacity, do we need to plan to go out and raise financing in the next few months? And they need to be looking for any potential red flags or just potential strategic areas for growth and communicating that to the CEO proactively. I mean, ideally, you're meeting with your CFO and CEO, ideally on a weekly basis, just to talk through kind of what are the top priorities, how are we tracking to them, so that when you do get to month end, it's not a surprise how the numbers are coming out.
That's great advice. We use this term, Josh used the term, the fractional CFO, fractional HR. This has kind of become a buzzword because we live in sort of a democratized economy. We work in a shared economy. We work in a remote economy now, a remote space economy. When is it appropriate in your mind for a founder or a venture to use a fractional CFO? And when is it time for them to bring that in-house and have a full-time CFO and financial team?
Sure. And I think a lot of it comes down to, It's going to vary a little bit depending on your specific business situation. But in general, I would say it comes down to size and then also complexity of the business and what you're trying to accomplish. If you're less than 500,000 in annual recurring revenue, you probably don't need a fractional CFO that's going to do like a full-blown forecast for you and have kind of, more frequent check-ins. Maybe quarterly is a great cadence to be on with that. But I'd say once you hit kind of that $500,000 to $1 million in annual recurring revenue, that's when it makes sense to bring on a fractional CFO. And then as you scale, I'd say definitely north of 5 million, kind of in that 5 to 10 million in sales range is when it might start making sense to bring like a full-time CFO in-house. But again, like if you've got one revenue stream and it's kind of pretty easy to keep up with the financials, you can probably save a little bit on that cost and keep a fractional CFO for a little bit longer.
Brian, you seem like a very caring and patient person. So, but you've never had to work with somebody like me. I am deathly afraid of numbers and had a business partner who was basically our CFO. His name is Joe Pecora. Joe and I had some knockdown, drag out battles. And so what would you say to the people out there who are more like me, who are, can tell a good story, but when it comes to the numbers are afraid of kind of, dipping into that part of the story? How would you help somebody like me?
And I think it all comes down to we've all got strengths and areas of expertise. And as a founder, your time is too valuable to focus on everything, right? Like in the early days, okay, you've got to wear a lot of hats. But once you've kind of got product market fit and you're really trying to scale the business, you need someone who can be strong in the areas where you're not as strong. And you also need someone who's, you don't want to have a contentious relationship, but you need someone who can be kind of gentle yet firm with you, who's going to raise their hand and say, look, I disagree with you here. This is what you need to be thinking about and preparing for. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the CEO, right, the founder, they're the boss, right? They're the final decision maker. But the best CEOs I've seen are ones who can take feedback from a lot of different sources.
That's great. That's great advice. I would say, Josh, develop a great relationship with your CFO to avoid droom. Don't run out of money.
Did you learn that at the Kelley School, Brian?
They didn't use it quite like that, but it was always, cash is king.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, when I take a step back and think about Flex and that relationship with Joe, I think, maybe much like your professor, I didn't necessarily receive the information the way I needed it. And then I don't think I took the feedback the right way. So luckily, we can all take a step back and look at those relationships. So listen, Brian, this show has been a little bit different than our traditional show because you have some real tactical advice that you have given, and we appreciate that. And you also are a prolific writer on LinkedIn. And I've really never told anybody to go check out this person on LinkedIn because you continue to truly give advice and help. And it doesn't come off as advice. It truly comes off as helping and genuine. So I encourage everybody to check out Brian. We'll put it in the show notes on LinkedIn. And, this is the part of the show where I always tell everybody it's a community. John's here to help. I'm here to help. I know Brian's here to help. There's people out there in the breaker community that are here to help. So Brian, if there's anything we can do, you let us know. I'm sure you and John will have more to talk about. He's always using fractional CFO, that word all the time. So maybe your name can kind of slide into that conversation.
I appreciate it. And guys, this has been, a great experience and definitely looking forward to seeing what else we can break together.
Definitely. Thank you, Brian, for your time and for sharing your story.
All right, guys, have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening, Breakers. Next time on Breaking the Grade.